Good morning, noon, and night, everyone. Welcome to the Weis Choice Podcast. I want to thank you all for making the wise choice and listening in today. This is actually the debut recording of the Weis Choice Podcast, and so I'm excited to tell you all about my goals, my motivations for doing so, and why I'm here. So thank you all again for listening in, and I hope you enjoy. I figured I'd start with my background. So I'm born and raised in Florida. I spent the first 24 years of my life there. It's where I met a bunch of friends. It's where I went to school. And then I moved to Rhode Island for 2 years, which was a wonderful experience. I don't regret any of it. If anything, I'm proud that I got to survive at least two New England winters. So that was nice. But nonetheless, that was a wonderful experience. I am back home. COVID was a big factor in that because when I was living up there and COVID struck, we had the lockdowns and there was all the chaos at the beginning, the toilet paper shortages and everything. And, it was a big wake up call to kind of look around and assess the situation and see all the chaos and, ask myself, is this where I want to be when stuff hits the fan? I was thinking about family. I was thinking about all my friends and being around them and knowing that if things really did get crazy, I mean, if we're talking, we didn't know. I mean, all of us that were there at the beginning, we remember the confusion of the pandemic and we really didn't know how bad it was going to be. And so, that May, I think it was, is when I moved back home. And I'm glad to be back. Florida is a wonderful state. I love both states. I'm grateful for the experience. I would highly encourage, anyone out there that wants to get out and see a new part of the world to do so because it is a life-changing experience. We can't replace it. But as I said, I am back home in Florida. One of my favorite things to do while I'm down here is kayak. I won't say exactly where I live, but I get to enjoy the beautiful coasts of Florida, and there's plenty of kayaking opportunities, fishing opportunities, nature trails, all types of beautiful stuff like that. We really are a beautiful state. I always say it's just kind of the people and the politics that maybe make it less than ideal. It can be that way sometimes. Florida isn't the perfect state. It could be easy to read the news and see all the stories and see the drama and the gossip about our state. But anyone that wants to trash a state, they're more than welcome to come here, enjoy our winters, and then let me know how they feel. Probably one of the biggest catalysts for recording this podcast is just being a fan of all the other podcasts that are out there. So obviously, there's the Joe Rogan Experience. You have the Lex Friedman podcast, Hotboxing with Mike Tyson. I enjoy the Investors podcast, the Jordan B. Peterson podcast. There's so many great podcasts out there, and I could list them all, and there'd be too many to list. But perhaps the most influential podcast actually would be that of my friend's, who's been a dear friend of mine for 12 years. We went to high school together, and he actually started a podcast with one of our former classmates. It's called The Fantasy Bible. They deal with all types of things regarding fantasy football leagues, how to build a great team, just talking football in general. And I highly suggest that you check it out. It's a wonderful podcast. They're great guys. He's supported me for a very long time, and I would hate to pass up the opportunity to pass that support back on to him. So please check that out. I would greatly appreciate that. Going back to the question of why I'm recording this podcast, aside from just being inspired by the other podcasts that are out there and even seeing my friend doing something cool and saying, hey, I want to do that too, there was actually a really fascinating revelation from listening to his podcast, which was just the simple fact that, I get to talk to him on the phone and we see each other from time to time and we're grateful for each other's time in our lives. But there's just something about sitting down and listening to a recording and knowing that, and I don't want to get morbid here, but it's just the reality that if anything ever happened to my friend, I have recordings where I can go back and I can listen and I can hear him in one of his happiest states. I can hear him talking about things that he enjoys, things that he's passionate about. I get to hear the smile on his face. And that's something that, I probably wouldn't have had that perspective 5 years back. I don't know that I would have even had that perspective even just 2 years back, but a lot has gone on in the last years. As we've said, COVID was a big factor in everyone's lives. I don't know anyone that wasn't affected by it. This very same friend got married. And so there's been a lot of life events that have happened that have brought us closer together. And just knowing that I have kind of a time capsule to look back on and see that is a real wonderful thing. And it got me thinking about recording my own podcast where, I could sit here and I'm not going to lie about, wanting to make a certain amount of money or being able to, create a source of passive income with this, and maybe not being able to live off of it, but at least having something comfortable. And those are all real goals. I won't deny that. But there's just an added perspective that I didn't have, that I can look back now and I can say, you know what, maybe this can be something where I can sit down, whether I treat it like a journal, record my thoughts, whether I get to talk to people, interview community members, spread wisdom, whatever I get to do with this. But if nothing else, I hope that this can be a time capsule for the people that I care about, the people that care about me. And we can always look back on this and hear ourselves in moments of joy, in moments of thought provoking conversation, and just general peace and clarity. I think that's wonderful, and I hope to accomplish that with this. Now, with that said, I had mentioned that passive income is a goal of mine, and I won't deny that. I'm totally okay with shouting into the ether and just having something to look back on later in life. But it would be hard to feel zero disappointment if I didn't see some kind of, I don't even want to use the word financial success, because, I don't expect to blow up and be a Joe Rogan. I don't expect to have, a million subscribers or anything like this. But at the end of the day, if I can add a source of income to strengthen my financial stability, those are all things that are wonderful. And I do hope that those come. Ideally, this podcast would be just one of multiple sources of passive income. I first started getting interested in passive income right before I turned 25, and I started thinking about retirement. I started thinking about, better to think about these things now while I'm 25 than when I'm 45 or 55. And so I started looking up ways to save money and, be better prepared for my retirement. One of the most common pieces of advice that I found, whether it was on YouTube, whether it was in books, or wherever, was the idea of building streams of passive income. For those who aren't familiar with the term passive income, it simply means making money or generating wealth when not actively putting in work or laboring for the money. So in other words, when you go to a job and you clock in, that's active labor because you're only getting paid for the work that you're doing there. Passive income would be like if you recorded a YouTube video or if you wrote a book and then you did the work once, you put in, a finite amount of minutes and hours to record a video or to write a chapter, write a book. And then once it was published, you could forget about it, set it, and still collect income, from viewers if you're talking YouTube, or things like that, and from book sales. Those are just examples of passive income that we might be familiar with without knowing the phraseology. But while we're on the conversation of passive income, one of the things that I want to do with this podcast is I actually want to catalog and document my investment portfolio and track my dividends as time goes on. So I want to be able to track the monthly income or quarterly income. I want to be able to look at the appreciation value and just talk general strategies about investing. I want to make it clear that it's, none of this is to give financial advice. I'm not an expert. I'm not a millionaire or anything like that. I mostly want to track my own progress. I want to be able to tell my own journey in my own words. I want to journalize it and follow it in real time. And just as I said with the time capsule, I want to be able to go back and look and see what was I thinking. If I made good choices, I want to know what motivated me to make those choices. What research was I doing? What strategies was I employing that led to those gains? So again, I'm not trying to give advice to anyone. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe to my mailing list for all the best stock picks. I simply just want to track my own progress, tell my journey, and hope that people find something for themselves along the way. Going back to the topic of COVID and reflecting upon these last 2 years and all the changes that have occurred and the integration of this new normal, it's hard to find anybody that hasn't been affected, and it's difficult not to be anxious or unsure of what comes next. But at the same time, it's also difficult to not be grateful for the opportunity. Anytime there's a transitory moment in history where we have the ability to change and redirect our course as an individual, as a nation, as a species, this certainly seems to be one of those times in history, and I would really hate to drop the ball on that opportunity. So that in itself has been a big push for me recording this. And in the same way that I was changing my thoughts about my future with my retirement and thinking about building a portfolio and investing, I was also thinking about my future differently when it came to my career. So after moving back to Florida and seeing the impact that COVID had on the food industry, it definitely made me reevaluate. And I decided that I want to go back to school. So one of the things that I did is I applied for a bachelor's degree. I'm going to go back. My goal is to get a teaching certificate and become a teacher. I would like to teach math, probably middle school level. When I moved back to Florida, I put in the effort to become a substitute teacher, and I've even worked in my old middle school, which has been a fascinating role reversal. It definitely brings back some memories in a way because I remember having friends that, they ate more meals at school than they did at home. And now that I'm working in the schools and I'm on the other side of the desk and I see these kids in these situations, it's just heartbreaking. I mean, we have kids that live in hotels. We have kids that, have to take bags of food home. My very first year, when I substituted, um, I was put in a permanent sub position in a class. So I was in the class. It was 8th grade ELA and creative writing. And I was in that class for about 3 months, teaching these kids. And I was almost becoming like their actual teacher. And about 3 weeks after I was relieved from that assignment, one of the girls in my first period class committed suicide. And it's a brutal reminder that this profession is extremely emotionally draining. Um, at the same time, it is really fulfilling, and I can't even begin to verbalize what you feel when you see the smile on a kid's face, when you see a math equation click that they didn't understand before, and now they know how to do it. When you see those bright moments of, a kid comes up to you and gives you a hug, and they clearly have respect for you. And despite the hardships and the stresses that I've already dealt with, I'm really proud to be a part of this work. So I'm excited to work towards my bachelor's, finish that up, and be back in the classroom in a more professional setting, and being able to provide for these kids in the most effective way possible. And yet, at the same time, I'm not here to white knight. I'm not here to go on some moral crusade for the betterment of the education system. My heart breaks for a lot of these kids. And I do think that if more people knew about what these children go through, that there might be more efforts to make changes. But again, this podcast is all about reflecting, imparting any wisdom where I can, and spreading positivity. However, at the same time, I have to be respectful to the privacy of the students and the parents. And so I don't expect to be sharing very many personal stories, but just to continue on with my background, that is one of my main career goals. And it's the industry I see myself continuing in. So with that said, I would love to share my stories and experiences in any way that can be helpful. I know that this pandemic has been very stressful on students, parents, and educators alike. It's not my intention to sit here as an expert. I've only just begun my educational career. However, I believe that everyone has something to teach us, and we have something to teach everybody. And so anything that I can share in my story that can be helpful to someone else, I'm happy to share. When I first started subbing, I never realized that I would be impacted so deeply and so quickly. As a substitute, I I wanted to make an impact, but I came in with the expectation of, oh, I'm just a sub. I'm going to do the best I can, and I want to reach as many minds as possible and to give the students the resources that they need to unlock their own potential. But I also understand that my own experience is limited, and so I try to work in the capacity that I can. But what's amazing is even as a sub, you don't realize how much you can affect these students, especially when so many of them, especially in middle school. Middle school is so hard, and it's when they're finding themselves. So, especially in middle school, just to be someone that shows them respect, that listens to their concerns, that treats them like the little adult that they're becoming, it makes a world of difference to them. Because the thing that we forget is as adults, we're thinking about bills, we're thinking about, politics, we're thinking about everything that's going on around the world and around us. But kids don't have all of those things on their mind. They're little people that are learning. And when you keep that in mind and you have the patience to work with children, you can get some really rewarding experiences out of that. If you practice that respect and empathy daily with the students, you can really build some special bonds. Unfortunately, a lot of the positive aspects of the job can't be decoupled or isolated from the negative parts. And so even relationships that start with good rapport can fall apart and even end in tragedy. I still think about the student that I lost the first year I was subbing. Even knowing that we have homeless kids, knowing that we have kids that are abused and neglected, that come from poverty, I still wasn't expecting a suicide. Suicide is a very sensitive topic, and out of respect to the family, I will be brief. But I also lost a cousin to suicide, and so this is not a new phenomenon to me. I've had my own experiences. I've attempted to take my own life when I was 18. I've dealt with depression and suicidal thoughts off and on. This is a dark reality that seems to haunt me sometimes. I pause for a moment of silence because I think of the little girl who will never get to walk down the aisle and get married. I think of the young man who didn't get to meet his niece or nephew. I pause because that was almost me. I pause because it could be someone listening right now. I don't know that I have all the answers or any of the answers when it comes to topics of mental health. It is something that I have struggled with and not necessarily found peace with. But I do find that as time goes on, when I go to write things down, it's hard not to find things to be grateful for. I've built a support system that reinforces the best habits and qualities about me so that I stay focused on the positive aspects of life and not become trapped in a cycle of guilt and self-doubt. I'm an American man living in one of the best times in history to be one. War and disease kill fewer humans than ever before. And yet I have to wonder, why are so many in America and in the West so miserable? And why does it seem like mental health crises are on the rise? As a young man, it can be difficult at times to not take personally what feels like the intentional dismissal of your emotions and concerns, and it often feels like there aren't enough voices speaking to our needs, particularly surrounding mental health. I've said it thrice and I'll say it thrice more. I am no expert, and I have no intention to lead anyone or guide them upon their journey. But I do wish to share my experiences, as a man, speaking to other men surrounding the conversation of mental health. We're always our own worst enemy, but we can hold ourselves to high standards and achieve it. I want this podcast to promote healthy male excellence and sound mental health for all. Sometimes it feels like this emotional lethargy is self-induced by the technology and digital age that we live in, and that we almost overcomplicate our lives or perhaps get rid of so many external threats that all we can do is look internally to society to find enemies. I don't know how much of that is true or not, but I've been trying to get out of this info age echo chamber and turn more to classical knowledge, read more books, and return to speakers like Marcus Aurelius and Sun Tzu. There are certain themes that have carried constantly throughout the thread of human history, and it's foolish to think that just because we wield godlike powers now, that we also wield godlike omnipotence. One of the core principles of this podcast is gaining wisdom and sharing knowledge, and there's plenty of that to be found in classical literature, theology, and philosophy. Another part of universal wisdom is the unique knowledge that each culture and language holds within itself. There are many truths and perspectives hidden in the languages we don't understand. Despite years of studying Spanish in middle school, high school, and college, I am still only fluent in English. But I've been working using language apps like Duolingo, Memrise, and taking advantage of the people in my life to be able to practice Spanish more. And hopefully I can use this podcast to practice conversational Spanish and improve my pronunciation. I'm still a learner when it comes to picking up Spanish and other languages, but I know that it can only open doors when it comes to accessing information and unlocking a trove of wisdom. Familiarizing yourself with other cultures around the world can only breed empathy and bring us closer together. And I think we need more of that in our time of hyperpolarization. I'm not going to derail the first podcast with a rant about purple politics, but there will be times to have those conversations. Working together and spreading wisdom means having hard conversations, and it means taking tough looks in the mirror and reevaluating our own principles and our perspectives. Remember, COVID is a transitory time in history, and this is the perfect time to look around and ask yourself who really has your interest at heart. You might find overlap with both parties. You might find overlap with neither. I feel that now is the perfect time to have these conversations, and to do so respectfully, keeping an eye out for someone with a 21st century perspective on leadership. I have my own list of icons, idols, and influences that I turn to and who I think are great examples to help guide us through these times. They are examples of the greatest feats of humanity, of cooperation, of empathy, of leadership, and of action. As time goes on and we record these podcasts, I will sit and analyze these figures, look at their biographies, explain how they've had an impact on me, and also explain how I think they will continue to influence the world from here on. I sincerely hope, and it is with the utmost intention, that all political conversations on this podcast remain respectful and productive. I've been shamed, I've been insulted, I've been demeaned, I've been kicked out of political groups, and so I have no interest in telling anybody what is right or wrong, or to sit here and to profess any kind of prophetic truth. I sincerely hope that we get to have deep conversations about the things going on in our world, and that we get to enact solutions that are effective and democratically proposed. I think it's foolish to view and judge others for our incomplete understanding of what brought them to this point. It's easy to sit there and say, I wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't think that way and behave like that. But it's another thing to admit to yourself that you've also never had to walk in their shoes. With all the hysteria and distrust aimed at our fellow citizens, I just want us to breathe for a moment. Bring the temperature down. Ask ourselves, is my neighbor really making my life worse? Is my politician, my representative, really making my life better? I can't answer that for you, but I feel very confident that the answer is more likely to be found in your neighborhood than in Washington, D.C. I think back to Thomas Jefferson's original proposal that each state be like its own American experiment. Each community has its own needs, has its own culture and set of norms. I'm not saying there's no role for a central government. I'm not saying that there aren't projects that need to be worked on in a global effort, but it would seem that there is a deep urgency to return to a local community level of engagement. My final thoughts recorded on this podcast will just be a reiteration of the principles laid out at the beginning. Nothing is as important as our fulfillment and having autonomy over making the decisions in our lives. Now is the time to reassess our priorities as individuals and as a society. Unrelated to COVID, I had a health scare where I ended up in the hospital with an acute case of colitis. Thankfully, it wasn't that serious, but there was a time when surgery was being considered, and so a shift in my perspectives on a lot of things that were important. I've been working myself sick with jobs I didn't even enjoy for what wasn't even a lot of money. I want to sit here and tell my story because I don't want someone else to have to wait to go to the hospital to wake up. I don't want you to have to sit in a hospital bed for 4 days to make a change in your life. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I have moved back home. I have started working out 4 days a week. I have gone back for my bachelor's degree. I have made multiple changes in my life, and I feel better for it. I had to put away the excuses, and I've developed 7 priorities that I turn to guide me along my journey. They are as follows. The first deal with basic skills in survival. These are the ability to take care of myself, cook, garden, and anything that might be useful, God forbid, if society ever collapsed. These are the things we need to know to survive. The second is health and well-being. The food that we eat is fuel for our body, and the way that we treat ourselves is the way that we treat others. If we are not healthy physically and mentally, it is impossible to be productive and to be a beneficial member of society. The third is skills in communication and connections with other people. We are a social creature, and so we need to have bonds. We will need help from other people from time to time, and we're always going to need the wisdom of others to make ourselves better. So it is important to develop healthy relationships that are built on mutual trust and respect. The fourth is ethic and organization. Ethic is something that you do every day, and habit doesn't take a break. The things that you practice and the person you are on a day-to-day basis is who you will be in the future. If you do not keep yourself organized and you don't keep your workspace clean, you are inviting chaos into your life and encourage dysfunction. The fifth is information and wisdom. Fear comes from the unknown, and fear makes people desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. Knowing your own limitations can prevent you from taking on more than you can chew. Success in this world is about providing value to others, and we often do that when we know how to do something that others can't. This does not have to be a college degree or something that you find in a book, but it might be. Ultimately, the end goal is enlightenment, developing a love for learning, and understanding that everyone has something to teach you and that you have something to teach everyone. The sixth priority deals with expression and creativity. Artistic development and creative thinking boost our problem-solving skills. Participating in the creation of art and culture also brings us great happiness and emotional fulfillment. In a technical and digital world like ours that heavily promotes logical and mathematical thinking, returning to artistic expression can serve as a primal cleanse on the brain and reset our emotions and open us up to new perspectives. And finally, the seventh priority is that of investing in wealth. I put this one last because my hospital visit reminded me that there are a lot of things more important than money, but it is still a vital priority. There will be a time when our bodies break down. And just as I was speaking earlier about active income requiring a constant input of labor, eventually your body won't be able to keep up with your previous work. Even worse, inflation likely means you'll need even more money to live off of than you did when you could work at your full potential. These are reasons to think about these things early and prioritize all 7 of these principles to stay ahead of the curve. For one final time, I want to reiterate, I'm just a guy on the internet. I'm just trying to have some fun, share my story, maybe make some money along the way, and save this moment in time. Thank you all again for listening to the Weis Choice Podcast. Take care.